Hi, I'm Pierluigi Severino. I am the author of The Modern Garden, The Outdoor Architecture of Mid-Century America, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. Today we've got a bunch of interesting folks. We'll be visiting with the CEO of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Carol Quillen, the 2025 president of the AIA, Evelyn Lee, the founder of Tucson Modern, Demion Clinco, and the co-host of HGTV's Who's Afraid of a Cheap Old House, Elizabeth Finkelstein. And now here's your fearless host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. The rain hammers against clear story windows. Each drop, a tiny metronome marking the passage of time. What was once the optimism of the post-war era is now a thick layer of dust on the cork floors. A shroud over the once gleaming surfaces of this abandoned, decaying, mid-century modernist house down the street that you've loved for decades. The martini glasses are still on the bar, as if no one had ever left, and one can still imagine the laughter of the parties held within these modernist walls. What happened? Was it disinterested heirs? Rising land prices? Uninformed realtors? Or deferred maintenance? Why can't others see that this exceptional modernist house deserves to be remembered, to be celebrated, to be lived in again? So what do? Well, most of us, most of the time, nothing. We just wait. We hope that someone else will do something. Welcome to the most wildly popular school of preservation, Passive U.
Go ostriches!
Because sadly, most of the time, there ain't no cavalry coming over the hill. If you can't spot the person who cares the most about saving this house, guess what? It's you. So when you see a house that deserves better, step up. Pick up the phone, knock on the door, ask around, and start that conversation. Preservation is about actively shaping the future. Even in a world of indifference, a single voice can bring a forgotten dream back to life. Yours. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Carol Quillen is CEO of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, a national nonprofit created to preserve America's built heritage. All of it. From Benjamin Franklin to Frank Lloyd Wright, the National Trust looks out for significant buildings in trouble. Before that, Quillen was president of Davidson College.
Go Wildcats!
And is a founding member of the American Talent Initiative to increase graduation rates for low-income students.
Go Talent!
Here's George's conversation with Carol Quillen.
Carol, I am so glad to meet you because you're one of the few people I know who has a passion for Latin. I understand that you read Latin like it was a romance novel at one point, like you were just really into it.
Well, it's a great pleasure to meet you as well. And that is an exaggeration of my Latin facility. I learned Latin late in my life. Well, for learning Latin, I learned it in graduate school because I wanted to read Augustine's Confessions in Latin, having read it in English in college. So I learned Latin well enough to read it slowly. Unlike my professors who had learned it, from the time they were 4 or 5 years old. So
we forget that Latin is such a beautiful language, really.
It is an incredibly beautiful language, in part because of its precision and the ways in which the precision of the grammar maps such careful relationships between objects. So it really helped me to understand the relationship between language and the reality it purports to describe in a way that I never had before. So it's the relationship between sort of language and its communicative function that I really learned from Latin and really loved. And in addition to which, there's just some beautiful writers of the Latin language. And, it's interesting, the people who loved it the most, I studied them a little bit, these guys in the 16th century who decided that you should only speak in the Latin of Cicero. That's what killed it, right? Because once you freeze something in time and you don't let it change, it becomes less useful than it would be if you were to allow it to adapt. So if you can only use words that Cicero used, you can't actually describe things that are happening around you in the 16th century.
Yeah, it's really
interesting, huh?
It really is.
Maybe only to me.
Well, to me too. I mean, I can sing in Latin. I won't do so today, but I was in I was in a choir in high school. I will share with our audience what singing in Latin sounds like. It's going to be like this. Cantate Domino, cantate, cantate, cantate Domino, canticum novum, lauseus in ecclesia sancta. There you go. Pretty neat, huh?
Very neat. Just since we're talking about singing in Latin, when I was in high school, my crazy music director, who is this amazing woman, decided that we should do Bernstein's Mass for our musical. And so we all learned to sing a little bit of Latin because of
Hardly
that.
Ambitious, right?
Yeah, she never reached for the stars or anything. She was incredible. And so we actually did it. She had done it once before with another class, and it was so much fun. I learned a ton by doing that. And even though I can't sing at all, it made me believe in the power of theater for kids. I just think it's a really important experience to be able to be in a production like that, and the discipline, the teamwork, the collaboration, and the thrill of it all when you finally put the show on was just an amazing experience.
Yes, for me too. Singing in Latin in a choir and trying to coordinate all that was quite an experience. Thank you for letting me pursue that digression with you. Let's talk about preservation. You are the CEO of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, an organization celebrating its 75th anniversary right now?
That's right. That is right. 75 years.
And I understand in the beginning, the National Trust got started with a little office in Ford's Theater, where Lincoln got shot.
That is also true.
Yeah.
Yes. The National Trust, it's interesting to think about the way the National Trust has evolved over time. I think chartered by Congress, initially very focused on preserving iconic monuments and documents and artifacts from American history, and the ways in which over time the organization has really focused on the power of place and how important places and a connection to place is in human well-being. And so really expanded its activities as our ideas about preservation and the power of place have changed over time. I am not an expert on preservation. Most of my career was in higher education. And so I have a lot to learn still about preservation and its history and how it works. But as someone who's coming to the field from the outside, I am inspired by the ways in which preservation tools can serve the public in ways I did not anticipate.
Tell me about the properties that the National Trust owns. You have, I think, about 27 or 28 properties at this point, 3 of which are modernist.
Yes, we own and operate or collaborate in the operation of several properties across the country, most of which were left to us by folks who wanted these properties to be held in trust for the public, to serve the public in a variety of ways. And it's a pretty heterogeneous group of properties. The Edith Farnsworth House, I think, we have the Pope Leahy House and the Glass House are important icons that are maybe particularly of interest to your listeners. And people visit those because of their iconic statuses within architecture. They want to see these spaces. They want to see the construction of them. They want to understand the architectural design. They want to connect with the architects who imagined and constructed them. And then we have other places that are important for historic reasons. Montpelier, which was Madison's home, a place where Madison imagined, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and a place where Madison also enslaved over 300 people whose names we know. So it's a place where one can really feel and experience the contradictions in our own history and the ways in which enslaved people supported the emergence of an ideal of freedom to which they could not participate. And so a lot of the contradictions of our own history become deeply apparent when you're in a place like Montpelier. And then other places with which we're connected, the Tenement Museum in New York, which is a place where it's possible to experience what it was like for generations of immigrants to this country to live and work in a particular neighborhood in New York, right? So neighborhood history, iconic architectural history, constitutional and presidential history. We have sites that are connected to all of these different strands of our past. And it's a fascinating portfolio of places that are so different one from the other.
People can visit all these places, of course, but they can also become members of the National Trust, right?
Yeah, we welcome new members. It's really easy to join. And I think because of the range of activities that preservation participates in, we're really concerned about activating the power of place. I think when a lot of people hear the word preservation, they think of pickling, right? They think of like keeping something in its same state or keeping something fresh or roping it off and
or making it like Cicero.
Yeah, exactly. Like not letting it change, right? And that is not what preservation to us, that's not what preservation means at all. Preservation really means activating the power of place, right? To serve some community purpose in the present. So it's how we connect to the present. We go to Montpelier so we ourselves can experience the contradictions present at the founding of this country and live as responsible citizens in the present as someone who wants to honor the ideals of the founding without replicating the horrific exclusion that happened over time. So I think it's really about connecting the past to the present in meaningful ways and activating the power of place to serve the public now. Our properties do connect us to the past, to people in the past, through the stories that they hold, right? And some of those stories are about iconic architecture. Some of them are about our own history. Some of them are about the lives of interesting people who helped to build these properties. So it's a fascinating experience to visit them. And members of the National Trust have particular benefits around visiting our properties. So we would encourage everyone to join and get to know our work and perhaps maybe come to think as we do about preservation as a tool that's really powerful in what it can create rather than what it simply maintains.
When you were president of Davidson College, how did you manage all that? I mean, it's been said that a university is 2,000 people with 10,000 opinions. I mean, how do you make that work?
Well, Davidson is a great place, and it was the gift of a lifetime to be able to be a part of that community. And I think one of the fun aspects of the job is dealing with so many different constituencies who have very different ideas about what the place is all about. And so students, faculty, alumni, parents, they all have very different notions of what Davidson is for. At Davidson, we were fortunate to be guided by a very clear sense of purpose, a North Star. And I think any organization that's as complex as a university needs that kind of North Star. Like, why are we here? What are we for? And to just keep everyone focused on that. And Davidson had that.
What was it, by the way?
So it's one sentence. Everyone on campus can say it. Davidson College assists students in developing humane instincts and disciplined and creative minds for lives of leadership and service. And so we're there for the students, disciplined and creative minds, humane instincts, leadership and service. These are words that guided our decision making. And it's funny because when I went to the National Trust, I wanted that. Like, I want that sentence that everybody knows that says, why are we here? Like, what justifies our existence, actually? What are we doing here? Why does this organization exist? And we've been working really hard to sort of think about what does that mean? And really, it's about activating the power of place, right? Activating the power of place. We believe in the power of place, as do your listeners. We believe that places matter, preserving them matters, preserving them so that they can create new possibilities in the present.
I must say, I've worked with mission statements in my previous career as a management consultant for 30 years. And that one from Davidson is really one of the best ones I've ever heard. Most of them are so generic as to be meaningless.
Exactly right. And listen, I want to be very clear. That is a statement that other smart people, way smarter than I, created, right? That is an abiding statement that is a gift that Davidson gives to everyone who's a part of it. And I benefited from it. But it's very clear. And so this is how I think also about the National Trust. Like, what makes us different, right? And also, what kind of statement can abide over time? So you don't want something that changes every 5 minutes. You want something that abides over time, and you want something that's sufficiently specific so that it gives you an identity. And for us, that identity is about the power of place and activating the power of place to serve the public good. So preservation isn't about maintaining the status quo. Preservation is about creating new possibilities in the future for connection, for economic revitalization, for an experience of awe or joy that you get when you see the glass house, for example, for the first time. We make those experiences possible through preserving places like the glass house. Activating the power of place to serve the public in a variety of ways is sort of how I'm beginning to think about the mission, what it means to be us now.
It sounds very Quaker in a way.
Oh, no. Yes.
Who knew?
Perhaps it is. Yes, I went to Quaker school for many, many, many years. Actually failed kindergarten, so I was there for longer than most people.
How does one fail kindergarten? Please tell me.
It takes skill and talent, and it's a unique attribute that perhaps only a few of us have. So I was at Wilmington Front School in Delaware for a long time. I grew up in Newcastle, which is a historic town. So I felt very connected to the specificity and the distinctiveness of the place I grew up. Not every place looks like Newcastle. I'd visit friends, I'd go other places, and I was keenly aware of the distinctiveness that was my town. And I think that distinctiveness matters to people, right? That we don't want every place in our country to look the same. We don't want a generic landscape. We want San Francisco and New Orleans and Philadelphia to look different. And we want the built environment to reflect the histories and the stories of those places. So growing up in Newcastle, going to a school that was founded in the mid 18th century, that connection to the past and to a tradition, I think, does predispose me to value what preservation can make possible.
I think everyone needs to go to a couple of Quaker Friends meetings if they want to understand the power of that silence and contemplation and consensus, because you really can't get your mind around it until you've experienced it personally.
I think that's true. And, if it's possible to go to a Quaker meeting where there are little kids present, it's particularly inspiring because children don't have they're not self-conscious about what they say. They speak what they feel in the moment. And it's really quite a beautiful experience. So I'm grateful for my Quaker education and for the opportunities I had there.
Looking ahead, what buildings are in trouble right now that you all are working to help save?
So, as your listeners may know, each year the National Trust produces something called the 11 Most Endangered List, which identifies places that are at particular risk. They might be buildings, they might be neighborhoods, they might be landscapes, but these are places that matter to the local communities that surround them, and they are at risk for one reason or another. And through the publication of that list, we generate support and interest and advocacy that helps to protect and activate those places in ways that might not be possible without their appearance on the list. So I would look to the 11 Most Endangered list for the places that we think are both incredibly important to preserve and activate and also at some risk. What we're working on now as an organization is thinking about I always ask myself, what's our obligation now? Like at Davidson, what is the obligation of a place like Davidson right now? And at the Trust, I'm asking, what's our obligation right now? How do we best serve the public? And so we're focused on making sure that our commemorative landscape honors the achievements and the contributions of all Americans. We want our commemorative landscape, the properties and places that we mark out as important, to tell the truth about our history and honor the achievements of all Americans. So that's one thing we're focused on. We're focused on a climate initiative, which is basically about adaptive reuse. We should use what we have. It is a much more efficient and cleaner, climate-friendly way to go about meeting our needs if we use the buildings that we have. There are an enormous number of older vacant structures in this country that could be preserved, adapted, and repurposed to serve communities now. And then we're thinking about how we can help build connection among Americans now, between Americans living now and people whose stories we want to understand, between Americans living now and the promise of our founding. So places hold power because they hold the stories of everyone who's ever been connected with those places. And if you visit these places and you listen to the stories of those who have gone before you, you develop a kind of connection to the past that is unique to you and powerful and can help ground you in the present. We want to activate the power of places to provide that connection for all Americans. And I think this speaks to, our polarization and how do we begin to rebuild a sense of identity and community as a people. We've got to find ways of doing that. And right, how many different kinds of people visit historic places. It attracts a broadly diverse audience. We're all interested in connecting to the past. We have a shared experience when we go to a historic place or a beautiful place. If a bunch of people go to the glass house, they all see it, they look at it, they're sharing an experience, they're each experiencing it somewhat differently, but that common ground gives them a connection, right? A connection they wouldn't otherwise have. We want to activate the power of place to help all of us build those connections, both with each other and with our history. And then thinking about how the power of place can help us build community and recover a sense of shared purpose as Americans moving in the same direction.
Well, let's wrap up, Carol, with something mid-century modern that you happen to love, and that's Fresca. You're a Fresca fan.
I do love Fresca. There's not enough. It was hard to keep enough Fresca in the refrigerator when I'm around. So
I didn't even know they still made it.
It's not always easy to find, but it's coming back. There are a lot of new Fresca drinkers out there. Yeah, it's making its way back onto American shelves and refrigerators. And if you've never tried a Fresca, believe me, you've not lived. It's very delicious.
I remember that there were a lot of Fresca recipes in the 60s for drinks, like Fresca and vodka and Fresca and rum and different kinds of tiki things done with Fresca.
Perhaps in the 60s, people were just willing to put anything in liquor. I don't know. I normally drink mine straight. So I can't speak to the concoctions that it's involved with, but it is I do love Fresca. It's true.
Well, when we invite you to our next party, we will have some Fresca in inventory.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for talking with me, Carol. Been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk about the power of place in the National Trust.
That was George talking to Carol Quillen. Architect Evelyn Lee is the 2025 president of the American Institute of Architects, the largest professional association of its kind. She is also SLAC's head of workplace strategy and innovation, founder of the consulting firm, The Practice of Architecture, and she hosts a great podcast called Practice Disrupted. A graduate of Drury University.
Go Panthers!
And SCI-Arc.
Go Ray Cappy!
She's won both the National Associates Award and the Young Architects Award. Here's George's interview with Evelyn Lee.
Evelyn, I think a lot of people have heard of the AIA in their community in some way or another. There are state chapters and local chapters in the national organization. But for our listeners, tell us what the AIA is and how it got started.
The AIA is the American Institute of Architects. It is the world's largest design organization or association with over 100,000 members, actually 100,362 this week. As you said, it has components at the local, the state, national level. I believe we actually serve over 204 different localities, and we are accessible global to our members. Even though we're the American Institute of Architects, we have a global membership. The mission of the AIA really is to create a healthy, just, and equitable built environment and to support our members with resources to do that while elevating the value of our architects. It was started over a century and a half ago. AIA was founded in New York in 1857 when a small group of 13 architects decided to gather and say we need an association, built on the premise that we are better together. And since then, it's grown into what it is today.
And it's headquartered now in Washington, D.C.
Yes, the headquarters is undergoing a pretty extensive renovation, and we're excited that we'll be having a grand opening the first week in December in 2025.
Oh, I can't wait to go to that party.
Yeah, I need to make notes now for the invite list. Yes.
It's a really significant building for Washington, designed by Walter Gropius and the Architects Collaborative about 1973. Very modernist, right?
In a very brutalism modernist way, yes.
Lots of concrete.
Lots of concrete.
And it's undergoing this great renovation right now. What's going to change in the building?
A lot. So the building needed a lot of TLC. It needed a lot of systems updates and upgrades. One of the most notable features is we're going to be opening up a few of the floor plates and bringing some light down into the basement. It has a huge basement plan with no natural light down there before. It was a crypt, essentially, down there.
Very
so
dark
we'll be
down
bringing
there.
a lot of daylight, and it's going to be flooded with natural light. We're updating all of the systems, the HVAC system, using the latest sustainable technologies. And as we all know, it's very hard to upgrade an occupied space. So this is the first major comprehensive renovation since its opening date. We wanted to make it in line with some of our own climate action and sustainability goals. So a lot of it is just making an inefficient building efficient. We all know that the most sustainable building, right, is the one that you don't have to build new again.
Yes.
And we just wanted to make sure that we were showcasing and living and breathing and walking the walk and talking the talk that we encourage all of our members to do.
With all this renovation, did you have to move people out during construction?
Absolutely. It all happened at an interesting time, right? The plan for the building was coming together as the pandemic started taking place. So there was always a plan to move people out. The need to actually have a swing space to move them to for a couple of years essentially went away when the AIA was forced to go remote like everyone else during the pandemic.
Oh.
So most of the workforce, actually all of the workforce, I should say, of the AIA continues to remain remote. We do have tenants in the building. We do rent out, I believe it's the top 2 floors right now, and we've worked with those tenants so that they can remain in the building during the renovation. But all of AIA staff has been remote since a year or two even before construction began.
Oh, that's really cool. Now, when you ran to be president, you focused on 3 areas: rethinking how you practice architecture, redesigning how you collaborate as a profession, and re-envisioning how we create value beyond practice. The architectural field has been pretty staid for a long time. So what does it need to be different in the future?
Oh, where do we start?
Yeah.
There's so many things that have become, recurring in the natural language of when you get a group of architects together, right? It's how little we make, how tired we are, how undervalued our services are by clients.
And how the public doesn't appreciate you, right?
And how the public doesn't appreciate us, although the title seems to still be rather prestigious because everybody, still wants to be an architect. And Janine, who I have a podcast, Practice Disrupted, and Janine and I talk a lot about what needs to evolve because we cover everything from culture to leadership development to operations to business strategy to marketing and communications. And we need to really change the way about how we think about the profession, our work, and how we work with one another all together. It's a complete mindset shift, because if you were to ask me, what is one area we can improve right now to move the needle? The profession and the industry is like a building. You can adjust one area, but just because you fix one thing, because it's a part of a larger system, unless you slowly begin to improve all of the things that we need to fix together, it's going to be a struggle to move the industry forward. So for me, it's a mindset shift in how we approach practice and what we think our role as architects is. And ultimately, I think we need to rethink how we value our businesses and look to develop services and products and businesses beyond what we have always traditionally delivered for as long as anyone can remember.
So what would that be? What would the products and services be that are beyond traditional architecture?
Well, so I did work at a firm called MK Think for 5 years, where I worked very closely with the principal to lead the strategy group. MK Think is an architecture and design firm at heart. It was Miller Kelly Architects, and then they brought on Nate Gore, who didn't want to add his initials into the mix. So he added the Think piece, which is the strategy group. Now, the strategy group was specifically brought on to identify opportunities for architects beyond our traditional services. So what are services that we can be offering both pre and post our traditional offering? So when you ask me, what are the other things that we can be doing, for instance?
Yes.
One of MK Think's longest standing clients was Oakland Unified School District. And I believe they've been working with the K through 12 education system in Hawaii for over a decade now. But what MK Think is to these institutions is they are the keeper of the data of everything regarding their real estate portfolio. So if Oakland, for instance, had a leak, this is a real story, had a leak in one of their offices and they needed to find swing space to relocate several people, they came back to MK Think to figure out where to move those people. More strategically, though, Oakland Unified School District has always struggled with the size of their student body following middle school. There's a sharp drop off. So they need to make decisions about how many classrooms to open in the high school, or whether or not they need to shut down a high school for a year and actually send people to other schools. MK Think took all of the real estate data that we had and overlaid census data to help Oakland Unified School District make those decisions.
So it really a facilities management kind of function added into architecture and design.
Yeah. So at a high level, it's facilities management. I would like to think it's a little bit more strategically driven because part of that engagement was doing a lot of the community engagement piece too to support some of the decision making, not just the data.
But it's different because typically a school system would do that themselves and not give it to another firm. So that is an enhancement for the practice.
Absolutely.
What other things can architects be doing? I'm interested.
So as a for instance, this is maybe more on the residential side. I have a very good business school friend. She doesn't have a background in architecture, but within my community, she recently launched an app where people pay a monthly service to get reminders on regular maintenance updates for the home. You need to change your filters, including washer and dryers. The rainy season is coming up. Make sure all of your downspouts are clear, those type of things. But the caveat there is for a little more. You get a handyman or a contractor for an hour every month that can also come out and do those services for you and do some things that are like also more heavy lifting. It goes back into kind of facilities and operations management post-occupancy of the building. If you're a residential architect, it's just kind of reminding the new owners how to take care of the product that you delivered for them.
I have read most of the AIA national magazines over the last 60 years because we have them in our library at US Modernist. And one pattern I notice is that about every 10 years, the AIA gets into this kind of anxiety that the public doesn't love them and doesn't appreciate the value of architecture. And so they have a lot of meetings and a lot of committees get together, and they inevitably come to the same conclusion, which is we must educate the public. We must bring them up. We must elevate them up to where we are, and then they will get it. And this fails every time. So what could they do differently to engage the public?
There is something the AIA has been doing a little bit differently, and it's actually, I think it's Buildings by Design.
America by Design.
Well, it's Buildings by Design. In particular, it's going to be called America's by Design. I've been having great talks with Mike Chapman, who is the host, and I think he's
Mike.
Also working.
Yes, sure.
Works behind the scenes, right, as like kind of director and producer of the shows too. But we are going to actually be elevating and showcasing architecture on mainstream broadcast TV, which can then later also be available via all of the now streaming networks that people tend to watch. What can people do differently? I think you're right. This happens about every 10 years because we need to really focus like what needs to be on our agenda for the strategic plan. For me, it's elevating the voice of the architects. And one of the reasons why I went back to business school is at the time I was working for a nonprofit organization called Public Architecture up in San Francisco. I was a project manager, a program manager for the One Plus program, but we had plenty of architects at this time. It was pre the Great Recession, so think 2006, 2007, that were giving 1% of their billable hours towards the public good pro bono. The problem was they had a really hard time finding nonprofit organizations to give that opportunity to pro bono. And a lot of it was because the nonprofit organizations, like, we don't need a ground up new building. I don't understand what you can do for us. And one of my impetus for going actually back to business school is to really understand the language from our client side. How can we speak to them in a way that resonates with them? How can we tell our story about the value we bring? That's one of my focuses for the AIA in the coming year. Elevating our practice, re-envisioning the practice of architecture, but also rethink about how we talk about architecture is how do we take all of our strategic priorities around climate action and equity and really put a business case on top of it so we arm our members with the language that they need to go out and talk to clients and potential clients about what it means from a business point of view to integrate these ideas into their buildings.
As you look towards 2025 and 2026, with a new administration coming into Washington, a more conservative administration in many ways, Justin Shubo, who created the Make Federal Buildings Beautiful Again, is expected to be appointed to a new position and has declared that all federal buildings should be classical. How do you deal with something like that?
Yes. So there is new administration coming in. But this is the second time this administration has been in place. And we know that there's a lot we can't anticipate, given what we know happened the first time around. But I think there is a lot of things that we can anticipate and pre-prepare for. Bill Bates was president of the AIA previously when the Trump administration was in place. And he sent a very thoughtful email to Ilya and I. And Ilya is going to be the 2026 president of the AIA, Ilya Azaroff, about his thoughts on where they really struggled with the administration and how to approach the administration the second time around. We are going to be very vocal, obviously, as we were before, about an executive order asking all federal buildings to be classical. We're going to lean into our members to help us drive that work. The other thing that we are going to focus on really is, while we may need to be reactive in the federal realm, we're going to be focusing on, and this goes back to all of the local components that we talked about at the top of the episode, being as proactive as we can at the state advocacy level. Not dissimilar from what we've been trying to do in California before the new administration takes place. But how do we really be proactive at the state level where we can? And then how do we better prepare ourselves to react at the federal level?
It's always been interesting to me how if you talk to modernist architects, they are fans of classical buildings as well as modern buildings. But if you talk to some of the classical architects, they really don't like the modern buildings at all. They're very adamant about it. Why is that?
You're asking me to answer and respond to a question that, and I'm clearly not in their head. So I don't know, America is a melting pot. I would love for all federal buildings to be reflective of the various different styles that both modernists and classical individuals like. And if they have issue with the next federal building that's being built locally, hopefully they can go to a community meeting and be part of the community process and they can put their voice in there. But the hope really is that the community drives the process.
I would hope so too, but the way it's looking, it's not going to be in the community's hands.
Right.
It's going to be mandated from above.
Yes.
So the community is going to be out of the loop if something isn't done.
And that's where we're going to actually lean on our members and our voices to collectively come together. At the federal level, we're going to have to be playing defense. So the local level, that we have greater ability to be more proactive.
Evelyn, thank you so much for speaking with me.
You're welcome.
That was George's conversation with Evelyn Lee.
Born and raised in Tucson, Demion Clinco is a prominent figure in historic preservation and advocacy, serving as the executive director of the Tucson Historic Preservation Foundation since 2015, after serving as board president for 6 years. He also founded Tucson Modernism Week in 2001, an annual 10-day fest celebrating Southern Arizona's 20th century history, design, architecture, and art, drawing over 7,000 attendees and featuring more than 40 events. He's also been on the Arizona State House of Representatives. My condolences to you, my friend. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning.
So what's up with Arizona? All we hear out here on the East Coast is this sort of crazed politics you guys have out there. Is that a new thing? Has that been around a while? I mean, you've been in the middle of all this.
Yeah, it's been around for a very long time. But I would say that as Arizona has become more of a battleground, it has really intensified the sort of extreme positions of individuals, which creates a little angst. But, it's always been the Wild West. And it's one of the reasons that we have so much great experimental desert architecture, because there was this freedom to try new things out here. And so the politics of today is just a different reflection of that ethos, which is part of our architectural and built environment.
Now, does Arizona still get hotter than California? How are you guys ranking on the hot scale lately?
I think it really depends on what part of Arizona and what part of California you're comparing.
I'm thinking sort of like Phoenix versus Palm Springs.
Death Valley is still a very hot place to be in summer, but Tucson a little cooler than Phoenix, but Phoenix is definitely getting hotter and hotter as climate change continues to impact our desert climate.
Did you hit the 120s this year?
Tucson didn't, but I believe Phoenix did. And there was one day last summer, I was up in Phoenix for some meetings, and my car was registering over 130 degrees on the temperature.
Oh. At what point do things like melt or not operate in the heat?
At that temperature. It doesn't matter how hard your air conditioning in your car works, it just doesn't cool down.
Yeah.
So, it's hot when you're walking across the asphalt and you start to sink into it.
Oh, right. I've seen YouTube videos where people are taking like eggs and frying them on the asphalt.
Yes, I think it gets very, very warm in the Sonoran Desert for sure.
Well, let's talk about modernism. You originated one of the first modernism weeks in Tucson in 2001. What made you do that?
So our Tucson Modernism Week grew out of the Tucson Historic Preservation Foundation, which is and was highly focused on public policy issues. There was a large civic transportation project in our community that was proposing to widen a street and demolish over 100 buildings, primarily mid-century modern commercial storefronts, an area now known affectionately as the Sunshine Mile. And so we looked at a variety of advocacy programs and approaches, and we really felt creating a Tucson Modernism Week to really bring attention to the values of 20th century architectural design, in particular, this roadway and the buildings that fronted it would be a valuable approach. And so it was really out of an effort to change the trajectory and save these buildings that we launched Tucson Modernism Week. And there was, Palm Springs was sort of nascent in their development, and there were a few other programs around the country looking at how you could sort of celebrate mid-20th century architectural heritage in this type of way. But we took a high educational focus, and we delivered to the community a different way of thinking about buildings that people had driven past for decades and had never stopped to look at. And not only did we focus on sharing the history and the design importance of this architecture, we also created everything from seminars for business owners who operate outside of these mid-century modern buildings to talk about how to do storefront and window displays to enhance and celebrate the architectural design and really create a new brand and value proposition for our city. And as that program evolved and grew, we were able to focus on various different assets and resources, not only in Tucson, but in southern Arizona.
So who were some of the well-known architects in Tucson whose work you're trying to save?
Yeah, so Tucson, like many desert southwestern cities, had its own cache of remarkable architects who moved to the American Southwest often because of environmental conditions. They often were, needed a place that had a dry climate because of health issues. There was a lot of health seekers coming at the early 20th century and mid-20th century. Some of the more significant 20th century, mid-century modern designers would be someone like Arthur T. Brown. Art Brown was an architect who had come out of the East Coast and was in Chicago and worked on some of the sort of secondary buildings at the Chicago World's Fair in the 30s before moving to Tucson. And in Tucson, he really saw the need to create an architectural language that responded to the climate. Tucson, like the other American desert cities, the climate is so extreme in summertime that there really is a need for shade and for architectural expression that takes into consideration these environmental factors. And Arthur Brown pioneered some of the first passive solar houses in the country. He pioneered solar glass window walls that would allow buildings to warm up in the winter, but ventilate in the summer and create a cooling space. Another amazing architect was Anne Rysdale. Anne Rysdale was the only registered female architect in Arizona in the 1950s. She had a very large practice and was sort of a populux architect who really delivered to her clients these big popular design trends. When we created Tucson Modernism Week, she was still alive at almost 100 years old,
Wow.
flew out and then drove herself down at 100 years old to Tucson to talk about her architectural contribution to the city. Places like the Tucson Inn and other sort of famous bars and sort of haunts in Tucson, like the Shelter, were products of her design work and then her very large firm. Other architects like Bernie Friedman was a really interesting and dynamic Jewish architect who had moved to Tucson right around and right after World War II. He developed a lot of small commercial buildings, including a property that's owned by the Tucson Historic Preservation Foundation called Hirsch's Shoes, which was an open storefront concept where you sort of walked into the store before you entered the glass door. So there was sort of a pre-lobby that had all these beautiful display cases, which is intact and is owned by the foundation and is one of the architectural treasures along the Sunshine Mile. Friedman went on to design major civic projects throughout the city in the 20th century and had just a very strong fingerprint on the design of Tucson and really figuring out how large civic projects would respond to some of the same environmental conditions. Another amazing design team would be William and Sylvia Wilde, a couple who were from Russia and who had both traveled to the East Coast, one by way of Europe, and then Sylvia by way of Japan and Southeast Asia. They arrived in Rhode Island, where William Wilde was attending the Rhode Island School of Design, and they designed one of the first international style houses in Rhode Island. Designed a lot of amazing, sort of very progressive architecture during the 30s before moving to Tucson and bringing this almost constructivist architectural approach to their design work. And they designed the full environment, everything from the silverware to the plates to the textiles. And then Sylvia passed away unexpectedly of a health condition. And William Wilde continued a very robust architectural practice and really pioneering some of the brutalist architectural styles that would become synonymous with this part of the country.
Like a lot of cities, Tucson was led by financial services in the 60s, who were building these great modernist buildings because the future was full of optimism. It was going to be very bright, and these banks were going to take you into this prosperous future. Tell me about some of the bank buildings you've got there in Tucson.
Yeah, so there were sort of a few major banks in Arizona and in southern Arizona that really saw the use of architecture as a way to sort of demonstrate the longevity and institutional nature of their firms. And they used architecture almost as billboard, hiring some of the best architects working in southern Arizona and across the state to design these very iconic, almost in some cases almost sculptural banks. One of the most recognizable is what was a Valley National Bank. Today it's a Chase Bank on the corner of Broadway Boulevard and Country Club in Tucson, designed by the firm of Bernie Friedman and Joe Bush.
Okay.
It has sort of a series of columns. It sits on a plinth, and it has this very sort of iconic design with sculptural features. It's really such an extraordinary example of sculptural and expressive design in our community that was and is still beloved and recognized as iconic and a landmark.
Tucson Modernism Week is still going on. When is it held during the year?
Primarily, our programming is over the first weekend of November, with additional programming sort of that first week of November and sometimes spilling into the next. We offer tours and lectures and films, special parties and events. We bring in all sorts of different types of design programming. Our organization over time have expanded beyond just the bricks and mortar of buildings, but to really tell sort of these more intangible stories about 20th century designers who helped contribute to this design culture that was manifest in Tucson in the 20th century. So we highlight dress designers and textile makers and jewelry designers, as well as architects and architectural designers who were working during this period, because there is this intersectionality that made Tucson sort of unique and special as a design hub of the American Southwest. These architects and these graphic designers and industrial designers were all living in this relatively, sort of modest-sized community of about, somewhere between 100 to 250,000 people during this period. And they interacted and collided and served on committees and associations and arts organizations together and overlapped in this really wonderful way. And so our organization has been able to preserve, in addition to physical buildings, we've been able to acquire and preserve design archives of some of these amazing mid-century modern designers who had also an impact on the texture and sort of feeling of our community.
It's really incredible that you've done this for so long and it just continues to grow. What kind of events can people attend when they come to Tucson Modernism Week?
Yeah, so we always have some big parties that are a great way to, put on your festive, best mid-century festive wear. And we have them at private homes and in some of our major mid-century civic buildings or civic spaces. We have a home tour where every year we've featured another collection of outstanding 20th century architectural design by some of the iconic architects of our community. We have a day of lectures and speakers who we bring in from around the country and who also are local. We produce publications annually, including a magazine, Tucson Modernism Week magazine, which features original scholarship highlighting architects and different types of designers and sort of design thinking that was occurring each year. And so there's numerous ways to interact and intersect with the programming that we do. And then we do advocacy throughout the year to help ensure that the wonderful 20th century architecture of our city isn't demolished.
Now, you forgot to mention one important architect, and that's Judith Chaffee, whose Jacobson House you own.
Yeah, so Judith Chaffee was an incredible female architect who was the only woman to graduate from her class at Yale. She went on to work for Eero Saarinen's firm and worked for another series of amazing nationally recognized architectural practices before moving to Tucson and starting her own practice. And in Tucson, she really pioneered sort of a hybrid of concrete desert design, using many of the tenets of brutalist architecture that was emerging and sort of flavors of postmodernism into this very localized expression and response to the climate of Arizona. Her work has really been recognized over the last decade as instrumental in defining desert modernism. One of her major projects, the Jacobson House, I was able to purchase a few years ago. We underwent a major renovation of that property, and it's available for rent on Airbnb and a place that people can come and experience these types of amazing places in an intimate, private way.
And it's on the National Register now.
It was listed on the National Register. It's one of 3 of Chaffee's projects in the Tucson community that are listed on the National Register. It's also designated a Pima County landmark, so it's a protected property.
Do you all encourage the use of preservation easements out there to encourage owners that they can protect their houses, not have them torn down?
So our organization, we've looked at different ways of using conservation easements. Our city and our county have a very, very strong historic landmark designation process that's almost as strong as a conservation easement, but it's managed by the local municipality, and it's hyper protective. These policies were established decades ago in our community. So we've worked with the city of Tucson and Pima County, our local jurisdictions, to update and refine those public policy tools. And then we've worked with private property owners to designate their properties as local landmarks. And these local landmarks require all changes to an exterior of a property to go through a commission review, and it would require any demolition to be approved by the mayor and council or Pima County supervisors. So we haven't been locally using conservation easements. Instead, we've been focusing on this public-private approach, which has been very effective to date.
Well, that's unusual because most municipalities don't have that strong a protection.
Yeah, Tucson, the city of Tucson was a very early adopter of a preservation ordinance, which modeled itself after Savannah, Georgia, which I think is really a best practice. It provides not only a sequence of very, very detailed review guidelines and expectations, but also provided this very, very strong anti-demolition component. And we've been able to use that very effectively to help private property owners and owners of mid-century modern design and early 20th century design protect these assets into the future for coming generations.
The website is preservetucson.org. That's preservetucson.org. Thanks for talking with me, Demion.
Yeah, such a pleasure. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
George was chatting with Demion Clinco. Elizabeth Finkelstein and her husband Ethan are the masterminds behind Cheap Old Houses, turning their love for historic homes into a curated feed full of affordable properties across the country. With over 1 million followers, she's helping people discover the charm of old houses, often under $100,000. Elizabeth is a historic preservation expert. She writes for Country Living magazine and co-hosts the HGTV series Who's Afraid of a Cheap Old House? Here's George's conversation with Elizabeth Finkelstein.
Elizabeth, you have a unique background in that you're on HGTV, and yet you have a history of being a historic preservationist. You went to Pratt. You worked for Open House New York. You worked for the Landmarks Commission. I mean, this is very unique.
Well, yes, I would say, one of the things my husband and I think are most proud of is that we may be the first HGTV stars to never tear down a wall, to not remove anything. So yes, we come at this from a preservation background 100%. I was born into it. I was born in an old house that I watched my parents restore as I grew up. So to me, there's no other way to do it except to be in an old house and to keep the character. So thank you for recognizing that, we try to be a little different. I don't think we're like most typical HGTV stars, but grateful that we were given the opportunity to be on the small screen anyway.
Oh, yes, it's fantastic. Now, when you talk about old houses, what does old mean generally? What years are we talking about?
Well, I show houses all the way up through the early 1970s, honestly, on our Instagram feed, Cheap Old Houses, which is the feed we run, which features homes for sale for under $150,000 all around the country. I think if you were to look at the discipline of historic preservation, for so long, old houses have been considered Greek revivals, Queen Anne's. And then I think in recent years, and you certainly know this, there's come to be more of an appreciation for mid-century homes as being worthy of preservation. And so there's definitely an interest in them. I think they've really come splashing into the public eye, I would say, in the last decade. And there's definitely an appreciation for them. So people want them and people want to see them. And I get very excited when I find one. So I certainly consider them old houses. Sometimes the materials they're built with, because so many of them were prefabricated, they sometimes present different preservation challenges than houses that may have been built, decades prior. And I think that's very interesting. And I think they're very worthy of preservation. So I certainly consider them to be old houses.
Well, tell me about some of the mid-century modernist houses that you've encountered so far, that you've worked with.
So we show cheap old houses on Cheap Old Houses. And it's interesting, we don't come across a lot of mid-century moderns on that account. So they're few and far between. But when they do come up, they're really special. And I think the ones that I love are the real time capsules. I especially love the mid-century bathrooms we come across. Many of them have really beautiful mosaic tile throughout, colorful sort of fixtures inside.
Pink and purple toilets and things like that.
Oh, yeah. That's some of the stuff people go nuts for on our feed. Also, the kitchens, with the turquoise wall ovens and the really interesting sort of countertop stovetops with the saran wrap dispenser and all the really fun, quote unquote, newfangled inventions that were really popular at the time that people put in their homes. And it's really fun when you see them surviving. I think, kitchens and bathrooms are two of the most flipped rooms in all types of houses. When anybody goes to sell their house, they They redo the bathroom, they redo the kitchen to try to make it saleable, or it's the first thing they do when they move into their own house. And so when you see one that hasn't been touched and left intact, it's really fun.
When a house becomes cheap, what is the main reason? Is it because it's been vacant for a while? Is it because it's small? What makes it a cheap old house as opposed to a house that's worth a ton of money?
Well, one of the great things about historic preservation is that sometimes an economic downturn in a place can be the greatest friend to historic preservation because people don't have the money to keep flipping, renovating, turning their house over. And in some of the sort of wealthiest parts of this country, I think the houses are most at risk for either demolition or being stripped of their character. So oftentimes the cheap houses in this country tend to be the best preserved. They may not be the most well-maintained, but the elements are still there, which is what we love. So they're cheap for a whole host of reasons. They're cheap because the average home price in that area, it just can't command a high price, either a lack of jobs or the place has really been kind of struggling to get back on its feet. You see this in a lot of Rust Belt towns, Pennsylvania, Ohio, kind of moving into the Midwest. You see a lot of these places. And these are really wonderful places that had thriving industry at one time, which led to the building of so many beautiful homes that are now the best old houses, and people have moved out and gone elsewhere, and now the homes still survive. So they're cheap because of that. They might be cheap because they require a lot of work. The house is in a really bad state, so that's a different situation. That's going to take a very specific buyer to come in and fix it. So there isn't necessarily one reason why they're cheap, but every house we show on our feed has character left. I would much rather find a house that has been poorly maintained but not ruined than a house that has been flipped and is all gray inside and very uninteresting.
Right. Now, you tend to work with houses for the owners to live there. That's the premise. It's not for flipping, right?
Yeah. Our whole mission is to get people to invest in these homes. And what comes along with that is an investment in the community. So if you're going to restore an old house, you're probably going to be spending less time at big box stores buying new materials and more time spending your money investing in local craftsmen to help you fix things in your home. So it's not just fixing the house, it comes with it kind of investment in the people that are keeping the built environment of a place alive. Also, when you move into an old house that's falling apart in a town that everyone has been wondering about and you come in and you rescue it, it's like instant friends. That's kind of an instant sort of hook into the community. But yeah, I think that for us, this goes beyond just making money off of homes. I mean, I have no problem with people making money off of homes if they're intending to respect the home while doing it. But taking some of these houses and putting in the cheapest stuff for the bottom line and then walking away with no interest in what happens to it or what happens to that community, that's definitely not something we encourage. By and large, most of the homes that get purchased off of cheap old houses do go to homeowners very much interested in a project and really, I think, interested in a change of lifestyle, seeing themselves kind of finding a new identity through the restoration of their home.
And how do you find out about these houses to put them on your website?
So my job is to read the entire internet every single day. And that's what I do. I am constantly looking for cheap old houses. The community also, we have almost 3 million followers and people are constantly sending us suggestions, which is wonderful. And then we send out 4 subscription newsletters every week that are filled with different kinds of cheap old houses, cheap old farmhouses, ultra cheap old houses, cheap old houses abroad. And so I am just constantly in the space of finding these homes and really tapped into it. So I, at this point, know what to look for in terms of what people are going to respond to, the kind of character people want, the kind of thing that I think people are out there looking for. And so it's just my job. It's just what I do. I feel very lucky to get to do it.
And what are the key characteristics that people are looking for?
People are looking for character. I think people are a little bit sick of not only homes that lack character and that all look the same, but homes that are built with subpar materials. And I think right now there's a bit of an awareness of the environment. and of what we're putting out there. And if you can restore something that's already there, I think it rests on people's conscience a little bit better. And I think people are anxious for that. This generations of people now growing up with social media and so much access to design. These are people that are very design savvy. Certainly our audience grew primarily off of social media. And so I think these are people that want houses that represent them, that represent their identity, that have a personality that they feel they can express themselves through. So certainly character. I can't promise that every house we post is going to be in perfect shape, but I can guarantee that it's going to have the character you're looking for. And just depending on your budget, if you're looking for a house, maybe you're looking for a little bungalow in a city that just has a lower cost of living and you have a remote job and you can move because of that. We post plenty of little bungalows that are in perfectly decent shape. They're just in places where the real estate market isn't that strong. And then we post other houses that are complete and total fixer-uppers, decrepit old mansions that are going to take, hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment once you've closed on the house. And that's a different story.
You've been very helpful to people in talking about restoration loans. What are those?
I mean, depending on where you live, you can get different types of financing to restore your house. And then another thing, depending on where you live, there may be location-specific opportunities to help you. For instance, certain cities offer first-time homebuyer loans that will allow you to put very little, if anything, down on the house when you purchase it. There are loans that you can get to restore your house. Often those come with a timeline, so you might be given a year that if you put the money into restoring the house, you can kind of wrap that into your mortgage. There are also opportunities if you buy a house that is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which isn't that uncommon. There are many, many National Register historic districts throughout the United States, not only in luxury towns and luxury areas, but many in cheap old house areas, that you can get, at least in New York State where we live, 20% off the cost of any restoration work that you do on the home. So there are definitely opportunities out there. I think a lot of people move into these homes and they say, oh, maybe I can get a grant. And it's not likely that you're going to be able to get a grant for a private home you're living in. Most grants are usually for places that sort of can engage the public in some capacity. But for private homes, the National Register tax credits are an interesting opportunity. Yes. And looking to your bank for a renovation loan is definitely an opportunity.
Have there been any cheap old houses that you thought just couldn't be restored and somebody pulled it off?
Yes. So we own a cheap old farmhouse that we purchased after we started to see people on our own feed buying these homes and restoring them. It inspired us right back to be able to do it. And that house was honestly a tear down by most people's standards. And we found out after we purchased it that we had been bidding against somebody who actually intended to tear it down because that seemed like the obvious thing to do with it. Our intention was always to restore it. And I think when you go into something saying that when there's a will, there's a way, it's always possible. I have seen so many instances where it just takes the right buyer. We post giant 50,000 square foot school buildings, giant churches that need to be fixed and restored. Gosh, I'm trying to think. There's a couple that we talk about often. Their Instagram account is Duncan Manor. This is a giant Italianate mansion in Towanda, Illinois, in the middle of a giant soybean field. It's otherworldly. And that house had been listed on Illinois' most endangered places list for years and years and years. Many people had tried before them, and they just came in with the right mindset, and they're able to make it work by turning it into a nonprofit and hosting events there, and the money feeds back into the restoration of the home. So I think any house can be restored if the person has the resources or is resourceful enough to think of ways outside the box to be able to make it happen.
Now, this last Christmas, I had the opportunity to watch a lot of Hallmark movies on TV and found one that reminded me of you. It was called Flip That Romance from 2019. Have you seen that one?
No, I don't watch a lot of Hallmark movies, but tell me about it because this one sounds like an exception.
So this one is one where two people are on different sides of a duplex and they're fixing it up and they have this falling in love thing. And by the end, they are, fixing up this marvelous duplex. Cute story. How did you and Ethan meet? Was it anything like that at all?
That's a very cute story. Ethan and I met through Ethan's cousin, but interestingly, there is an old house in our story. When we first met, weeks after we first met, 2-3 weeks, his grandparents' farmhouse went on the market. This was a giant 1700s farmhouse in New Hampshire on 200 acres. And his mother was one of 8 children raised in this home, and no one in the family could do anything with his house, and it was going on the market. And Ethan asked me if I wanted to buy that house with him. We were way too young and way too poor and didn't have our ducks in a row to consider doing something with a house like that at that time. It was a good indication that I was dating the right person.
You're 3 weeks in and he says, hey, let's buy my grandmother's house.
Yeah, let's buy my grandmother's 1700s farmhouse. I'm married to a very ambitious person who completely indulges me in my love of old houses, so I couldn't have found anybody better.
This needs to be a rom-com for Hallmark.
Yeah.
Can't you pitch this to HGTV as a special episode?
Right. I have often said that we should do Cheap Old Houses matchmaking service because, thanks to movies like The Money Pit, there's so much in the media about people breaking up when they get involved in a restoration. But by and large, what we see is that it bonds people. One of our first success stories on Cheap Old Houses was a couple. They had broken up already. And then one of them noticed that the house the other one had always loved was on the market. And he called him and they got back together and purchased this house together. And I have seen so many situations where people fall back in love over the love of a house together. It's a project that they do together and it bonds them. And I do believe it will either bond you or completely break you up. There's very little in between there. But for a lot of people, this is what they do. And certainly for my husband and I, this is our greatest love in the world. And so I would love more media out there that's showing that it is possible. So thank you, Hallmark Channel, for being the first.
Well, I'm sure Candace Cameron Bure would be able to star in it if you wanted to make it. She's the queen of those movies.
Yes, she is.
The TV series is Cheap Old Houses on HGTV. Elizabeth, thanks for talking with me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, George.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Malibu, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs. Okay, Tom, fearlessly take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 25,000 significant modernist houses, and access 5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by Bobby Morris. Advocacy is her middle name, or it could be Aurelia. We really don't know.
We don't.
U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guyout. George and I'll be back soon with another historic preservation edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.